Well, welcome to the afternoon session. I'm going to ask a question here. Is God a mathematician? Well, this was a book that a colleague of mine, an astronomer, Professor Mario Livio, wrote a few years ago. And I think it asks a very profound question. And in fact, that very profound question, I think, is one that can be extended down to all levels of reality, giving us a theory of everything that's a radically new one, which is, of course, the title of the talk. A theory of everything, well, what do we mean by that? Well, it's a hypothetical, all-encompassing, coherent framework that fully explains and links together all aspects of the universe. Now, finding a theory of everything is one of the major unsolved problems in physics. But note how this physics basis is sort of taken for granted. Everything refers to everything as long as physics is at the basis of it. Well, I think that I have a way of looking at things that will be quite a bit different. In this book by Stephen Hawking, I believe this was his first one, A Brief History of Time, he wrote, "If we discover a complete theory, then we shall all be able to take part in the discussions of why it is that we and the universe exist. It would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we should know the mind of God." Well, I'm sure that would be a very nice thing to do, and I'm not sure that Stephen Hawking would let anyone else question God than himself. But before we take put too much credence in this mind of God as viewed by Hawking, let's see what he really meant. What I meant by we would know the mind of God is we would know everything that God would know if there was a God, but there isn't. I'm an atheist. Well, okay, so much for that approach to a theory of everything. There is a new discipline, new paradigm emerging in science called digital physics, a collection of theoretical concepts based on the premise that the universe can be thought of as consisting of information rather than matter and energy. Now, information, well, this naturally sounds absurd, since it's obvious, I think, that we live in a universe that's made of real solid stuff. Information, on the other hand, has no physical existence. I mean, information, where is it? You can use it to make things, build things, but you can't hold information in your hand. So what is the motivation for entertaining such an odd hypothesis as digital physics operating in an unreal world? Well, there have been some new developments in electronics with respect to virtual reality. On March the 28th, the Oculus Rift company launched a virtual reality system that's debuted heralding the arrival of a technology that seemingly comes right out of science fiction. But it's real. I mean, these goggles are now for sale. And what will be for sale a year or two from now will be much more sophisticated, I'm sure. In fact, this viewer here says, "I'm testing the Oculus headset in a mountain climbing simulation. The experience teleports me to a jagged cliff in a virtual world so realistic that I can barely look down. When I do, my knees buckle and my palms sweat, and finally my brain has to interrupt and say, 'Dude, you're not really here.'" Things can get very, very interesting very quickly in this regime of digital reality. Seth Lloyd, a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT, states that we could have the whole universe simulated in a computer in 600 years, provided by the computational increase in power of Moore's law. Now, Moore's law may or may not apply, for another 50 years or 100 years, but who cares? I mean, he says 600. So what if it's 6,000 or even 600,000 years? Who cares? Eventually, we will get to a point where we will be able to simulate the entire universe somehow, unless this whole approach is wrong. Well, I'm going to take this approach and sort of take half of it and go one way and half to go another, and in the end, provide you with something that will actually make it possible to reconcile spiritual and physical reality. So stay in your seats. All right. Well, and from Lloyd's perspective, everything that exists is the output of the universe's computer. As a computation proceeds, reality unfolds. Well, what's the potential evidence for a virtual reality? I'm not going to go through all of these, but let's just talk about a few of them. In a virtual reality, you have the space and time governed by Planck length, mass, and time. That's something really only a physicist would appreciate. So let me just say that this is sort of a limit on how small something can be, how massive it can be, how fast it can go. These are Planck constants, and they naturally would fall out of a simulation that's digital. A digital computation would be able to generate these effects very easily. Or, for example, the maximum speed of light. Well, maybe it has to do with the processing power of some great universal computer that's making all this seemingly real. Objects are only rendered when observed. And this takes us back to the old question of whether or not, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? Well, in this view, if there is a sentient being around that would be able to hear be able to see or hear the happening, then that would basically show up. But the rest would stay within a database, sort of an unresolved database, until it's needed. And so you can actually save a lot of computing time and increase your bandwidth tremendously if you program things that only render reality rather than amount to every motion of every single atom and molecule and quark and whatever that we think makes up matter, real matter. The cosmic beginning, the Big Bang, would be sort of like booting up a system. Well, where did that come from? Well, from some other system on which you booted up this universe. It sounds pretty pretty extreme so far, but bear with me. I think that it's beginning to make more and more sense, at least to me, as I ponder these things. A ready explanation of quantum entanglement. Well, if you have particles, say electrons, rushing apart from each other because they've been created in some way so that their powers, or their spins, say, or something like that, are correlated, then we wonder how the action of one that we might take up here by virtue of some measurement could influence its partner over here, which is maybe by this time many light years away. How can they possibly interact? Well, it's not a problem if they're both being generated inside a computer. They're not physically located this far apart. It's just the game that's being played inside the Xbox. And so something like the explanation of quantum entanglement, it becomes trivial. And I won't go through the rest of them. There are other things that are really easy to explain digitally, but are really damn hard to explain if you want to have a system that's totally analog, that does what it seemingly does in human affairs. In this view, we do not actually. Here's the bugaboo. I mean, here's the bad downside of that approach. In this view, we do not actually exist other than as algorithms in a computer. So in this view, which is beginning to be taken seriously by scientists, we are really not us. I mean, we are not physical beings. In fact, we're not beings at all. We are somehow created in someone's virtual reality played on his super vast computer someplace, and if he shuts it down or there's a crash, the computer crashes, we are dead. Now, I don't like this view one bit, and I don't think that I would not want to have a theory of reality based on that. And I don't think you have to. The theory I'm going to present is based on the following, that consciousness is not viewed primarily as, let me read that sentence again, consciousness not as primary, but as the sole constitution of our universe and other possible realities. So I'm saying that the only thing that exists, both here and everywhere at all, even in some other universe, is consciousness. That consciousness is the basis of everything, the creator of everything, including what we view around us as the reality that we live in every day. And I'm applying I'm proposing to accept the existence of a vast transcendent consciousness, and that our true nature as beings of consciousness exist. We are not just algorithms in some computer. We are beings of consciousness, sort of like the flames off the bonfire. We are the incarnations of the consciousness in this universe exploring its virtual reality. So this is a lot better picture of us than that of merely being computer algorithms. So what are some of the differences between these 2 points of view? Well, the first one postulates an inanimate digital supercomputer scaled up by 10 to the nth power, where n can be 100, 200, whatever. Some huge power. We're not limited. Well, we are limited, but in the far future, who knows how limited we'll be. Not nearly very much compared to today. So if we scale up a supercomputer by about a factor of 10 to the 20, 10 to the 100, 10 to the 200, we will have the capabilities that Seth Lloyd predicted we would have within 600 years. Even if it's 6,000 years before this happens, it'll happen. Whereas consciousness chooses to act like a computer. Now, here's what I'm saying in that regard. I could pretend to be a computer, and I could write myself a little algorithm that says, okay, if n equals blah, 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 x equals blah, 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 etc., a do loop, okay? Now, I could sit there if I wanted to all day long and stare at that. And go, well, okay, n equals 1, fine. N equals 2, fine. N equals 3. I could, in my head, if I wanted to do something really crazy, I could act like a computer and have my own little chunking along with the computer. Acting like a computer. Well, if you have a great consciousness that is 10 to the how many orders of magnitude beyond us, then what's to prevent that being from doing this sort of thing and imagining a world that consists of that kind of virtual simulation? Like this is the Maya that the ancient Indians talked about in the scriptures. The supercomputer, of course, operates via electronics. The consciousness computer, or the consciousness being acting like a computer, would have highly structured thoughts. So I would see these thoughts as being like or rather I would see the consciousness as being like the hardware and the thoughts the software. And this is how the Maya game is played in the era of virtual reality. Our existence and environment is an illusion created by operation of the supercomputer. So again, we're algorithms, we're not people, we're nothing but algorithms. And the other view of consciousness is that our existence is 100% real, but as offspring of a superconsciousness, our environment is a simulation. By the way, this would be also useful for explaining paranormal phenomena. I don't want to get into that very much, but since we're having a joint meeting of SSE and PA, it's worth pointing out that this approach would answer some of the questions in paranormal physics, I might as well say, that are puzzling now. Things like entanglement and the role of the observer in measurement that Dean Radin talked about this morning. All these things can be easily explained if we assume that there's a great consciousness using part of itself, maybe only a tiny part of itself, to calculate all this stuff for billions of years to make this virtual universe that we live in and we're enjoying right now, sitting here in the heat, being very uncomfortable in the heat, listening to me. Well, never mind. Now, is there any evidence for this? This gets a little bit scarce, but there is some evidence, and I'll just point it out to you, and you can use your own judgment if you get this book by this physicist and see what you think for yourself. It's called My Big Toe, which means my big theory of everything. His attempt to be clever, and he is sort of clever, and I like Tom. But he was one of the first researchers working with Robert Monroe at the Institute in Virginia back in the 1970s already. He's a physicist by training. He's done a lot of consulting for NASA. Very nice guy, very smart guy, and he's done hundreds of out-of-body experiences, he says, since the 1970s. And what he says is that he's visited some of these other realities. Now, you know, I'm kind of skeptical about that, but on the other hand, viewing this as the reality that I'm proposing, it's not crazy. I mean, it fits into the scheme of things that I'm proposing to you today. You might not want to accept this, maybe yet, until you think about it some more for a while, but it's very consistent with what I'm saying. So take at least put it in the back of your minds. It may be that Tom has seen some of this stuff, and what he's done is reported back what the landscape looks like. And this, in fact, is what his cosmogony is. He basically sees worlds within worlds within worlds within worlds. And again, this is not a new concept. It's 1,000 years old. But that's sort of the reality that he sees. And there are sort of universes that are at the same level as our universe. Again, modern astronomy wouldn't have anything to quarrel with. I mean, modern astronomy postulates possibly millions of universes. And I'm an astronomer. And I'm telling you that what we're postulating in astronomy is, in some sense, as outrageous as this. But what he postulates is that you have hierarchies of worlds, and that everything in a given reality, when you ask for its origin, you have to seek its origin in a higher level of reality. And so the Big Bang, which created our universe, how was that initiated? Where did that come from? What was the cause of it? In Tom's view, it was from the next higher level that caused that. Because the one thing you cannot explain self-consistently within a given universe is where it came from. Because you always need some first cause that comes from somewhere else that is, in a sense, more potent. And I don't think there's any getting around that. I think it's Aristotle's first cause that we simply have to live with. And so at some level, this thing just goes on and on until it reaches this ladder goes on until it reaches the transcendent consciousness that is everything. And at that point, we just have to throw up our hands and say, look, you know, this is beyond space, beyond time, beyond my imagination. You know, I cannot understand this. I'm not going to worry about it, at least until perhaps I, you know, take part in this for a billion years and my spirit rises to, you know, be worthy of attaining this knowledge. So what would be the ultimate purpose of this? Now, I've given you an outline of what this might all consist of, this view of reality, but what's the purpose of it? Why do it? Well, Tom says, and I agree, for a one and only transient consciousness to experience its potential and thereby evolve itself. Now, if you're the one and only infinite being, and you want to know what you really are like, what kind of metal you have, what kind of, you know, knowing yourself, you would have to have something external to refer yourself to. But if you're all that is, and nothing else but you can exist, you can still kind of play this game by setting aside some of yourself as an arena in which a virtual world can be created, and then you can enter into it. So Campbell uses this as a source of decreasing entropy. I say simply that this is a way of evolving itself for a system that I'm proposing. Yeah, it helps to know that there are other astronomers who have thought similar thoughts. I mean, not virtual realities, but thoughts that the universe is a vast computer. This is Sir James Jeans. He talks about mind no longer appearing as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter, but rather to hail it as a creator and governor of the realm of matter. And so he saw the mental universe as being the basic universe, not matter, but the mental universe. And an old favorite of mine, Sir Arthur Eddington, the one who made Einstein famous by measuring the curvature of space in 1919. Here they are chatting in Einstein's garden. I think it's Eddington's garden. And Eddington also had belief in other realms. For example, he wrote a book called The Science and the Unseen World. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side, there's the mathematical theory of relativity. He took Einstein's general relativity and made the first textbook out of it. And this is a 1965 edition. And that was my textbook. I used that when I was in graduate school. And it was full of tensor calculus. Believe me, it was a slog. But this goes to show you how brilliant Eddington was. I mean, he was a real genius. Well, I've been signaled I've got maybe 5 minutes left. 3 minutes. Well, let's see what we can work through. So the physical world is real and all there is. That's the usual view that we get in mainstream science. Physical world is real, but other realities exist. Well, that's an improvement, but it still postulates two different things. A world of matter and a world of consciousness, probably, those being the two things. But maybe this creation of matter is really quite an illusion, because how do you make things solid and stable? I think it's inconsistent with the view of a continuous reality that we want to live in. And so it may not be necessary to actually create a physical world. If you simulate it well enough, that's all you need, because then you can pretend that it's real, do everything you would do in everyday ordinary life as if it were real, and you don't need to do something that may be logically impossible. It may be logically impossible to have atoms and molecules that do the things that they do. They do things that they do on the macroscopic scale, but on the quantum scale they do weird things, because the physics is weird down there, and because that's where these discretizations of quantizations of space-time rear their, they're probably not too ugly heads. So let's see what I have here. The third possibility, the physical world is a technology-based simulation, and so are we. It's that so are we business at the bottom that really gets my ire. No, I don't believe I'm a simulation. And the idea that you're living in a computer simulation was raised by Nick Bostrom. This was a rather famous philosophical paper that came out a few years ago, got a lot of publicity, and got a lot of people thinking about the virtual reality. So I'm not going to go much further except to point out that the last possibility of this set of possibilities for what the heck is this all about is that the physical world is a consciousness-based simulation, and consciousness is all there is and includes us. Let me find, if I can, one more view foil. Oh, I can't miss this one. Let's see. Maybe I can. Well, okay, I went too fast and I'm computer bombed, I guess. Anyway, that's my view, at least the beginning outline, the rough basis of a theory of everything that keeps all of physics as it is. I mean, we explore the physical world just as we always do, but we ourselves, we are beings of consciousness, and to understand what that is, it's a mistake to look elsewhere for its generation. It comes from within us, because that's what we are. Look no further, consciousness of what we are, and all that is, in my view. Anyway, enough of my blabbing. I'm open to questions.
Okay, as usual, we'll be asking people to line up to ask questions.
Bernie, I've got your book, and I've heard you before, and I must say I'm attracted to your hypothesis. Are you familiar with Robert Lanzine and his book Biocentrism? It's very similar, so you've read that too. Yeah. The only thing is, how do you get past the argument or the philosophical difficulty of solipsism and other minds? It sounds like you're talking about just one mind. In other words, your mind might be the only one, or mine might be the only one. So what about other minds?
Well, I think the way I see it is that there's a huge, there's a vast, infinite, maybe not infinite, but unbounded, transcendent mind, one mind. Now, this one mind could get lonely. I don't know if it will get lonely, but it's kind of, with one one consciousness only, you can't really explore yourself. So I think that what this entity does is to create universes using mathematics, because I think the mathematical capabilities of this being, would be pretty evident. But then sends into those realities consciousness streams that are you and me and the trees in the forest and the aliens somewhere else. And all living things would then simply be consciousness embedded in a virtual reality that would then do the things that you can in that reality, good or bad, and kind of develop even an ethics, a morality by virtue of the behavior that you would have, which we're doing right now is without even recognizing what we are. And so there are billions and trillions of other entities out there that are the other beings that we interact with. That's the view.
Bernie, as a physicist, I've always relished the equations that help me get things built. But when I joined the SSE, I found out that there was a consciousness that was a reality. And I've always wondered, how do you start to get some equations that are helpful to use in consciousness? Now, you have basically said there's nothing but consciousness. Do all the equations we've been using as physicists somehow go away?
No, I think there are universal laws that apply to each and every universe. So they may be different from universe to universe. In fact, that again is not a consciousness statement. That's something, if I were addressing an astronomy audience, which I have done, and I said that there are probably hundreds of thousands of other universes being created every second, and they all have different properties, I'd be okay. I mean, that's pretty much a speculative but okay astronomy. And I think the same thing applies here.
First, I'd like to say I fundamentally agree with the perspective that you're taking. I think it's a very interesting approach. Where I think it's challenging, and I think it's a challenge for anyone that's trying to put this in linguistic terms, is that when you couch it in terms of simulation, simulation of what? What is it simulating? Right? If it's not real, there's not a fundamental physical reality to simulate or to mimic, right? And I think this is a language barrier thing than anything. But I think some of these problems, when you talk about illusion or simulation, these come from being embodied in this physical 3D reality, right, and trying to extrapolate what we know about 3D reality to explain that higher dimensional reality that you're talking about.
That's right.
And the problem is you talk to people that have had these kind of cosmic consciousness experiences, even beyond like your typical out-of-body experience, where you really do have that one-mind experience, where there is no temporal reality and you're interconnected with all things. It's completely ineffable. And to try to come back and then codify that in a system that you can then convey to someone else using language is a very, very big challenge. And I don't know really the best approach to do it, other than for more people to have more experiences of their own.
That's right. As I was explaining earlier, the laws would still, you could practice physics easily in our universe. I mean, our universe has certain physical laws, and we can use them to do physics, and I always will be able to do that. The only question is, where do these come from? Did they come from just by chance? Or which created which? Consciousness, reality consciousness. Do you or do you not like the idea of a God? These things enter in, but the world as it's physically constructed is the same whether you believe this or some other hypothesis. This one kind of makes it clean. We are looking at the universe from within. We're little avatars, basically. We're avatars in a virtual game. And we play that game until the avatar gets shot or run over or dies of natural causes. And then probably we return to the spirit world, and probably come back and live other lives, not necessarily even here, maybe elsewhere in the universe. Who knows?
I think it's productive to think of it as pockets of relative reality, in the sense it's not that it's not real. The experience is what's real.
Right. And there are many different kinds of experience by very many different kinds of realities.
Right. Well, thank you.
I enjoyed your structure, Bernie, you created. It seemed like the computer simulation is a metaphor for something we have a hard time getting our hands around. Is that true?
No, I would take it pretty really, in that consciousness is a real thing, in my view. Okay, as real as you can get is consciousness, because that's all there is, in my view. Well, then if consciousness embodies itself within a physical body, which is virtual, then the consciousness does not need to acknowledge it, that virtuality, so to speak. That's as real as it would be to the avatar playing the Xbox game. And the game becomes a reality to the conscious beings that are playing it.
Well, we in Earth, I think, have a very limited concept of simulation, and you have a very expansive one in multidimensionality and all kinds of things that are allowed. Is that true?
Well, it's true. That's that slide I had about Seth Lloyd. He said in 600 years we'll be able to simulate the universe. Well, I think he's off by maybe a factor of 10 or 100 or whatever, but I think it's going to happen. But then there comes a question. Okay, you've got the virtual reality. Is it that it's maybe populated by beings that are not really beings at all, that are just software in a computer, or is this game being played by consciousness itself through individual sparks of that which are us?
Right, and so there you're implying free will, like we're actors that we're able to create our own acts.
Free will is essential.
Yes.
Without free will, this whole thing would be a charade. But with free will, this becomes a way to develop a whole ethical system out of nothing. If a being wants to see what his nature, I say his, I mean his or her, what is his or her nature would bring about because of his or her goodness, faced with circumstances that we live in, this would be a good way to develop ethics, to develop good from bad, by virtue of God, God himself being frustrated by having a mortgage bill to pay and he's out of a job. Well, he can learn from that. Even God can learn from that, I think. Right?
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Sure.
I liked your talk. One thing that I'd like to address is you make mention of a theoretical paradigm of consciousness being like a computer in a computer program type of simulation.
Yes.
Now, how do you reconcile that with just that being the current scientific paradigm within which we couch like epistemological knowledge? Because in other eras, we looked at other models to explain a very similar concept that you're talking about. You just seem to be bringing it to a very current model, and I wonder if that how that flows into other models that will come up later on or be reinvigorated.
Yeah. Well, I think that don't confuse a new computer with just a bigger and better electronic package. Having more and more transistors and faster and faster operation times. The type of computer could easily change, but the basic logic behind what I'm saying is mathematics. So it's built upon mathematics, which is not going to change. I think that the Pythagorean theorem will always be the Pythagorean theorem. It's never going to change. And I think that's the basis of it. And you implement that through a computer, which probably can change.
Thank you.
Since we have a moment left, according to the timer, I'm going to exercise moderator's privilege and just make the remark that I don't actually see a difference between the digital physics paradigm and the model you're proposing. The digital physics is simply one proposed implementation for the transcendent universal mind.
Well, I see a huge difference between you as an infinite being of consciousness that is a spark off the old block, chip off the old block, or you as simply something running in some supercomputer that would be dead the instant the computer crashes. I think one is something and the other is vapor. More questions?
Yes, barely.
Okay. So Ray Kurzweil, in his book Age of Intelligence Machine, talks about a virtual reality like a jet fighter simulator, where it generates all the algorithms to show what you're looking through out the cockpit window.
Yes.
And if you turn left, of course, it has to have the structure and all the algorithms just in case you do that. So I just wonder, I kind of agree with what York is saying as well. So any comments on that?
Well, I guess I just have to say the same comments over again, because I see just a huge difference between me as a immortal being of consciousness that may well return, almost certainly does return to a source, versus me as some algorithm being implemented in somebody's computer somewhere who could disappear if the computer crashes. These seem to be about as opposite as you can get in terms of modeling our nature.
Okay, let's thank our speaker.